The Thursday morning sun painted golden streaks across the courthouse steps as Judge Kesha Williams made her way up the familiar path. 23 years she'd walked these steps, 23 years of serving justice, protecting the vulnerable and upholding the law with unwavering integrity. Today, she wore simple slacks and a navy blazer instead of her robes, carrying a worn leather briefcase that held the Peterson hearing files she'd spent half the night reviewing. Kesha had always been a woman of quiet strength, raised by her grandmother in a two-bedroom apartment on the South Side. She'd learned early that dignity wasn't about what you wore or where you came from. It was about how you carried yourself when the world tried to break you down. She'd put herself through law school working double shifts at a diner, never complaining, never losing sight of her dream. Now, at 51, she was one of the most respected judges in the district, known for her fairness, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to truth. Officer Marcus Rodriguez stood at his usual post near the main entrance, all 6 feet of him radiating barely contained aggression. 15 years on the force had taught him many things, but humility wasn't one of them. The 3 stripes on his sleeve represented rank he'd earned through connections and intimidation rather than merit. His reputation preceded him. Defense attorneys cringed when they saw him on the witness list, knowing his testimony could make or break their cases. Regardless of truth, Rodriguez spotted the black woman approaching and felt that familiar surge of power. Another one trying to walk where she doesn't belong, he thought, his jaw tightening with contempt. He stepped directly into her path, blocking the entrance with deliberate authority. "Courthouse is for official business only," Rodriguez growled, his hand moving to rest on the handcuffs hanging from his belt. The gesture was practiced, meant to intimidate, to remind people like her exactly who held the power here. Kesha met his eyes calmly, adjusting her briefcase to reach for her identification. "I have official business here, officer. If you just let me show you." The Rodriguez's eyes had already narrowed. In his world, people like her didn't talk back. They apologized, they submitted, they knew their place. The fact that she'd spoken with such calm authority felt like defiance. And defiance was something Marcus Rodriguez never tolerated. "Don't reach for anything," he barked, though Kesha's hands were clearly visible, moving slowly and deliberately. "You people always have excuses. Always think you're special, think the rules don't apply to you." Behind Rodriguez, Officer James Thompson pulled out his phone, already recording. This was going to be good Rodriguez putting another one in their place. They'd laugh about it later in the break room. Another story about maintaining order, keeping undesirables out of their courthouse. What none of them knew was that cameras were recording from every angle, the comprehensive security system that Judge Williams herself had fought to install 2 years ago, complete with triple redundancy and automatic cloud backups. Every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to unfold was being preserved in crystal clarity, creating evidence that would soon destroy everything Officer Marcus Rodriguez thought he knew about power and privilege. Part 2. When authority becomes abused. The slap came without warning, a violent crack that echoed off the courthouse walls like a gunshot. Rodriguez's open palm connected with Kesha's face with such brutal force that her head snapped sideways, her carefully pinned hair whipping across her cheek. The briefcase flew from her grip, legal documents scattering across the concrete steps like wounded birds. The Peterson hearing files, marked with the official seal of her court, landed in a dirty puddle. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in where you don't belong," Rodriguez snarled, advancing on her as she steadied herself against the cold stone wall. His hand shot out, gripping her throat, pressing her back with enough force to make breathing difficult. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Maybe a night in lockup will teach you some respect." Kesha's vision blurred from the blow. white spots dancing at the edges of her sight, but her mind remained sharp and clear. 23 years of judicial experience had taught her that evidence was everything, that emotion had to be controlled, that justice required patience. And right now, Officer Rodriguez was creating plenty of evidence, every hateful word, every violent gesture being recorded from multiple angles. Officer Thompson laughed, his phone still recording from his carefully chosen angle. Man, she really thought she could just walk in here like she owns the place. He chuckled to Officer Daniel Davis, who had just arrived for his shift. Rodriguez knows exactly how to handle these types. That's why they keep him on the front line. Please, Kesha managed, her voice strained but remarkably controlled despite the hand on her throat. If you would just look at my identification, officer, you'd see that I have every right. Shut your mouth. Rodriguez twisted her arms behind her back with unnecessary force, the metal handcuffs biting into her wrists so tightly she could feel them cutting off circulation. You're going to learn today what happens when you disrespect law enforcement. You're going to learn that there are consequences for people like you who don't know their place. A small crowd had gathered, now courthouse employees heading to work, lawyers arriving for morning hearings, citizens reporting for jury duty. Some looked distinctly uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. But no one intervened. This was Officer Rodriguez, after all. He had connections throughout the department, friends in positions of power, a reputation for being completely untouchable. Among the growing crowd, Bailey Henderson, a courthouse bailiff with 12 years of faithful service, frowned deeply. Something about this woman seemed strangely familiar, the way she carried herself even in handcuffs, the quiet dignity that persisted despite the violence and humiliation. But with her face turned away and Rodriguez blocking most of the view, he couldn't quite place her. He'd replay this moment in his mind 1,000 times over the coming weeks, wishing desperately that he'd looked closer, acted sooner, done something to stop what was happening. Rodriguez began marching Kesha toward the courthouse entrance, making sure everyone gathered there saw her in handcuffs, saw her bruised face, saw her apparent defeat. This was what he lived for, the raw power, the absolute authority, the ability to put people in what he considered their proper place. Part 3. The dangerous game inside the courthouse. Rodriguez straightened his uniform with satisfaction and prepared his narrative. He'd done this dozens of times before arrest first, manufactured justification later. The system always backed the badge, always believed the officer's word over the suspect's truth. In the small, windowless holding room, Kesha sat quietly on the cold metal bench as Rodriguez filled out the arrest report with practiced ease. Her left cheek had swollen considerably, a dark purple bruise blooming across her brown skin like a violent flower. But her eyes remained focused and alert, watching him fabricate charges with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Trespassing on government property, resisting arrest, attempting to access restricted areas without authorization, assault on a peace officer, he muttered as he wrote, each lie flowing smoothly onto the official form as if it were established fact rather than complete fiction. You know, none of that is true, Kesha said softly, a voice carrying no anger, only a kind of weary disappointment that came from seeing this pattern repeat itself too many times. Rodriguez looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. Truth is whatever I write on this report. My word against yours, and guess whose word carries weight in this building? I've been protecting this courthouse for 15 years. You're just another troublemaker who thought she could talk her way past security. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. Here's a little secret. Nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to care. You're nobody. Down the hall, the morning's court proceedings were beginning without their presiding judge. Janet Morrison, Judge Williams's dedicated clerk for 8 years, was growing increasingly worried. The judge was never late, not once in all their years working together. It was completely out of character. She'd sent 3 text messages, each more urgent than the last, but received no response. The silence was disturbing. "Has anyone seen Judge Williams this morning?" Janet asked Patricia Henderson from the records department, trying to keep the anxiety out of her voice. "No, but there was quite a commotion outside earlier," Patricia replied, barely looking up from her computer. "Rodriguez arrested some woman trying to break into the courthouse. Really got physical with her from what I heard. Caused quite a scene." A chill ran down Janet's spine, spreading through her entire body like ice water. "What did she look like?" "The woman he arrested?" "I didn't see clearly myself, but Sarah from accounting was walking by. She said it was an African-American woman, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase that spilled open. Said there were legal documents everywhere with official seals on them." Janet's phone clattered to the floor, but she barely noticed. She knew. Somehow, in the pit of her stomach, she just knew. Meanwhile, Rodriguez was carefully building his narrative with Officers Thompson and Davis, coordinating their stories with military precision. She was aggressive from the start, refused to comply with lawful orders, made threatening gestures toward me. He instructed them, his voice low and authoritative. "We all saw the same thing happen, right? We're all on the same page here." "Whatever you say, Rodriguez," Thompson agreed readily, already reviewing his phone video carefully edited to start several seconds after the initial assault, making it appear that Kesha had somehow provoked the violence. "You know Judge Harrison is sitting in for the criminal docket today, right? He always sides with law enforcement. This'll be open and shut." Rodriguez smiled with deep satisfaction. Judge Harrison was old school, tough on crime, and most importantly, someone who never questioned police testimony, never doubted an officer's word. But even as Rodriguez celebrated his apparent victory, confident in his power and untouchability, the courthouse's comprehensive digital surveillance system was quietly uploading every single frame of footage to multiple secure servers across the state, creating an unchangeable, undeniable record of the complete truth. Part 4. The breaking point. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Officer Rodriguez took the witness stand 2 hours later. Word had spread throughout the building about the morning's dramatic arrest, another dangerous criminal trying to infiltrate the courthouse. Another perfect example of Officer Rodriguez keeping everyone safe from undesirables. Judge William Harrison, temporarily filling in for the criminal docket, looked every inch the stern authority figure Rodriguez had counted on. 72 years old, 35 years on the bench. Known throughout the district as a law and order judge who never questioned police authority. "Your Honor," Rodriguez began, his voice steady and radiating practiced confidence. "I was conducting routine security screening this morning when I encountered the defendant attempting to breach courthouse security protocols. She was carrying suspicious documents, acting erratically and nervously, and became physically violent when I attempted to verify her identity and purpose for being here." From the defendant's table, still in handcuffs, Kesha watched him spin his elaborate web of lies with the skilled ease of someone who had done this many times before and never faced consequences. The bruise on her face had darkened to a deep purple, visible even from across the room, but she remained perfectly still, her hands folded calmly on the table, despite the metal biting into her wrists. "The defendant claimed to be someone important," Rodriguez continued, adding a dismissive laugh that several people in the gallery echoed. "They always do, Your Honor, lawyers, judges, politicians, senators. It's a common tactic employed by criminals to avoid accountability and create confusion. She insisted she belonged here, that she had authority, that I'd made some kind of terrible mistake." Prosecutor Angela Walsh, A tough veteran with 15 years in the district attorney's office nodded along approvingly. She'd worked with Rodriguez on countless cases, trusted his word implicitly, believed firmly in supporting law enforcement no matter what. Officer Rodriguez, at any point during this encounter, did the defendant physically assault you or make threatening gestures? Yes, ma'am, absolutely, Rodriguez replied without hesitation. When I attempted to verify her identity and ask basic security questions, she became physically aggressive, made sudden movements toward her jacket. And when I moved to protect myself and others in the vicinity, she actively resisted arrest. I had no choice but to use minimum necessary force to protect myself, protect other officers, and secure the courthouse against a clear threat. In the gallery, Bailey Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The woman in handcuffs at the defendant's table had lifted her head slightly to observe the proceedings, and even from across the crowded courtroom, something about her profile nagged at him persistently. The elegant way she held herself despite everything, the calm intelligence in her eyes, the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her even in this humiliating situation. Where had he seen her before? These people, Rodriguez continued, warming to his theme with increasing confidence. They think they can just walk into any building, claim any identity they want, and when they're caught in their lies, they immediately scream discrimination and racism. Well, not in my courthouse. Not while I'm protecting it. The possessive words hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself. My courthouse. Several experienced court employees exchanged meaningful glances. The arrogance was stunning, even for Rodriguez, who was known throughout the building for his inflated sense of self-importance. Kesha finally spoke, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom with unexpected authority and precision. Officer Rodriguez, you testified that your body camera malfunctioned this morning during the entire encounter. Is that correct? Rodriguez's jaw visibly tightened, but he maintained his composure. Yes, that's correct. Technical difficulties. Equipment malfunction. It happens occasionally with older technology. How remarkably convenient, Kesha murmured. Just loud enough for the court reporter to capture every word for the permanent record. Your Honor, Rodriguez said, turning back to Judge Harrison with wounded dignity. I've served this courthouse faithfully for 15 years. I've made hundreds of arrests, testified in countless cases, and my record speaks for itself. I don't appreciate having my integrity questioned by someone who tried to illegally enter this building. Indeed, his record did speak for itself, though not remotely in the way Rodriguez imagined. Unknown to him, at that very moment in her chambers 3 floors above, Chief Judge Margaret Carter was receiving an urgent emergency call from courthouse security about the morning's complete surveillance footage and its deeply disturbing contents. Part 5. The plan takes shape. The defendant may now present her statement, Judge Harrison announced in his gravelly voice, clearly expecting this to be a mere formality before he handed down sentencing and moved on to the next case on his overcrowded docket. Kesha rose slowly from the defendant's table, the handcuffs clinking softly with a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Despite everything she'd endured, the unprovoked assault, the chokehold, the bruise darkening her face, the public humiliation, she moved with an unmistakable dignity that made the entire courtroom involuntarily take notice. There was something about her presence that commanded respect. Thank you, Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying an authority that seemed completely incongruous with her position as a handcuffed defendant. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to address these serious allegations that have been made against me. Something in her tone, in the precise way she spoke, made Judge Harrison sit up straighter in his chair. This wasn't the rambling, emotional defense he'd expected from someone caught trespassing. First, I'd like to address Officer Rodriguez's claim about his body camera malfunction, Kesha continued, her eyes finding Rodriguez across the courtroom. He was beginning to shift nervously in his seat, some instinct warning him that something was going terribly wrong. Officer Rodriguez, are you aware that this courthouse maintains comprehensive, state-of-the-art surveillance coverage, with high-definition cameras positioned every 15 feet along all approaches to the building? The color began visibly draining from Rodriguez's face, his confident expression cracking slightly. Furthermore, Kesha continued smoothly, her legal training evident in every carefully chosen word. Are you aware that all officer body cameras in this district automatically upload footage to the county's secure cloud storage system every 60 seconds, regardless of whether the local device appears to be functioning properly? It's a redundancy system designed specifically to prevent the convenient loss of evidence. Prosecutor Walsh stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant can't simply make evidentiary demands and legal arguments. She needs proper representation if she wants to. Actually, Kesha interrupted with perfect courtesy. Under Brady v. Maryland, I have the constitutional right to access potentially exculpatory evidence that the prosecution possesses. Additionally, as a pro se defendant representing myself, I'm entitled under the Sixth Amendment to present evidence and witnesses in my own defense. I'm simply exercising rights guaranteed to every American citizen. The legal citations flowed from her lips with the practiced ease of someone who had spent not just years but decades in courtrooms. Judge Harrison's frown deepened considerably. This was definitely not normal defendant behavior. In the back row of the gallery, Bailey Henderson suddenly went completely rigid, his entire body tensing as realization crashed over him like a wave. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the authoritative presence, the perfect legal citations. His mind finally made the connection that had been eluding him all morning, and his blood turned to ice in his veins. Officer Rodriguez testified that I was trespassing on government property, Kesha continued, her voice growing stronger. However, I was on a public sidewalk, approaching the main public entrance during regular business hours. Under Hague v. Committee for Industrial Organization, public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are considered traditional public forums where citizens have a constitutional right to be present without interference. Rodriguez's attorney, he hadn't thought he'd need one for this simple hearing, had been confident this would be over in minutes, was nowhere to be found. He stood alone as his carefully constructed story began to systematically crumble around him. Your Honor, Kesha said, reaching slowly and deliberately into a jacket pocket, I have here documentation that will conclusively establish both my true identity and my completely legitimate reason for being at this courthouse this morning. She pulled out a leather wallet, and even from across the crowded room, the distinctive gold judicial seal embossed on its surface was absolutely unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The courtroom held its collective breath. Part 6. The downfall begins. The 15-minute recess that Judge Harrison immediately called felt like an eternity compressed into minutes. Word spread through the courthouse with the speed and intensity of wild, frantic, whispered conversations in hallways, urgent text messages flying between phones, people literally running from other courtrooms to courtroom, to witness firsthand what was about to unfold. In the small holding room adjacent to the courtroom, Bailey Henderson stood before Kesha with his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. Judge Williams, Your Honor, I'm so deeply sorry. I didn't recognize you out there, and when they brought you in like that, I should have known. I should have looked closer. Bailey, it's all right, Kesha replied quietly, her voice gentle despite everything she'd endured. You weren't part of this. You didn't participate in what happened. But I need you to do something important for me right now. Go to my chambers, you have the access code, and bring my judicial robes. The black ones with the gold trim that I wore for the Mitchell sentencing last week. And Bailey, bring my gavel too. The wooden one from my swearing-in ceremony 23 years ago. As Henderson rushed out, his mind reeling with the implications of what was about to happen, Kesha picked up her cell phone, now finally returned to her, and dialed Chief Judge Margaret Carter's direct line. Kesha, thank God you're all right. Margaret's voice was frantic with worry and anger. We heard there was some kind of incident this morning, but we couldn't get clear information about what happened or where you were. Margaret, I need you to personally secure all surveillance footage from this morning. Every angle, every camera, every second. Multiple backup copies on different servers. This needs to be preserved perfectly because it's going to be evidence in multiple proceedings. Already done, Kesha. Already done. Margaret's voice dropped lower. The security chief called me about 20 minutes ago when he reviewed the morning footage. What Rodriguez did to you. We have absolutely everything. Every word, every action. It's worse than you can possibly imagine. The violence, the racial slurs, I can imagine quite well, Margaret. Kesha interrupted softly, touching the bruise on her face. I lived it. But now we're going to make sure that what happened to me this morning never happens to anyone else ever again. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Rodriguez sat alone at the prosecutor's table, his world crumbling around him with terrifying speed. Officers Thompson and Davis had quietly slipped out during the recess, abandoning him to face whatever was coming alone. His phone buzzed continuously with message after message, other officers who had heard what was happening, warning him to get an attorney immediately, to leave the building, to do something to protect himself. But there was nowhere to run from this. Nowhere to hide. When court resumed 30 minutes later, the gallery was packed beyond fire code capacity. Lawyers had abandoned their own cases in other courtrooms to witness this historic moment. Court reporters from throughout the building had come to observe. News of what was happening had even reached the media. Several reporters with cameras were being held back by security outside. Even Judge Harrison had been replaced. He'd recused himself immediately upon learning who the defendant really was, practically running from the courtroom in his haste to distance himself from this disaster. Then came the announcement that would be burned into everyone's memory forever, replayed and recounted for years to come. All rise. Bailey Henderson's voice boomed through the courtroom with more authority and power than anyone had ever heard from the normally quiet bailiff. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. The silence that followed was absolutely complete. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Rodriguez's legs simply gave out beneath him, and he collapsed back into his chair as if he'd been physically struck. Judge Kesha Williams entered through the side door in her full judicial robes, the black fabric with gold trim flowing behind her. And suddenly, everyone in that courtroom understood the magnitude of what had occurred. This wasn't just any judge. This was their judge. The woman who had presided over this courthouse with wisdom and fairness for 23 years. The woman who was known throughout the district for her compassion and integrity. The woman officer Marcus Rodriguez had called a filthy animal who belonged in a cage. Part 7. The Big Climax. Officer Rodriguez, Judge Williams said quietly from her rightful place behind the bench, a voice calm but carrying absolute authority. You may remain standing. Rodriguez couldn't have stood if his life had depended on it. He remained collapsed in his chair, trembling visibly. All the arrogant confidence that had defined him for 15 years completely evaporated. Beside him, his hastily summoned attorney was frantically scribbling notes, already knowing there was no possible defense for what was coming. Judge Williams pulled out a tablet computer and began playing the surveillance footage on the courtroom's main screen. I'm going to show everyone here exactly what happened this morning. Every word, every action, the complete, unedited truth. The courtroom watched in horrified, transfixed silence as the truth unfolded in high definition across the screen. The unprovoked approach as Kesha walked peacefully up the courthouse steps. The aggressive blocking of her path. The slap that sent Judge Williams's head snapping violently sideways. Rodriguez's voice, crystal clear. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Several people in the gallery stood abruptly and left, unable to watch any more of the brutal assault. Others sat frozen, unable to look away, witnessing the complete destruction of a man who had thought himself absolutely untouchable. Officer Rodriguez, Judge Williams continued when the footage ended, her voice still remarkably calm. Let's examine your distinguished career together, shall we? She opened a thick manila folder that had been waiting on her bench. 47 formal complaints filed against you in 15 years of service. Let me read you some highlights that the department somehow overlooked. She proceeded to methodically, systematically destroy him, complaint by complaint, revealing a pattern of abuse and misconduct that should have ended his career years ago. Rosa Delgado, the 72-year-old grandmother he brutalized during a traffic stop. Jamal Washington, the honor student he'd falsely arrested and charged with crimes he didn't commit. Dr. Michael Chun, a respected surgeon arrested for the crime of living in the wrong neighborhood. Your arrest statistics are particularly illuminating, Judge Williams noted, pulling out another document. 87% of your arrests over 15 years involve people of color, in a district that's only 58% minority population. Your use of force reports show you employed physical violence in 63% of arrests involving black suspects, compared to only 12% involving white suspects. That's not law enforcement, Officer Rodriguez. That's targeted harassment based on race. The attorney beside Rodriguez was scribbling notes frantically, knowing there was absolutely no defense for any of this. No way to spin these numbers into anything resembling acceptable conduct. But here's what's most damning, Judge Williams continued, her voice hardening slightly. This morning, you didn't just assault a random citizen going about her lawful business. You assaulted a federal judge who has been working closely and confidentially with the FBI's Civil Rights Division for the past 8 months to investigate systematic patterns of police misconduct in this department. Your assault this morning occurred while you were under active federal investigation. The revelation hit the courtroom like a bomb detonating. Rodriguez finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper, stripped of all its former authority. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. You didn't know because you didn't care to look, Judge Williams replied, her voice filled with profound disappointment. You saw a black woman, and you made immediate assumptions about who she was and what she deserved. You saw someone you thought was powerless, someone without connections or authority, and you decided to assert your dominance in the most violent way possible. She stood slowly, walking around the bench to face him directly across the courtroom. Officer Rodriguez, you said this morning that people like me need to learn our place. Well, let me tell you exactly what my place is, what it's always been. My place is on this bench, ensuring that bullies and abusers like you can never again hide behind a badge while terrorizing innocent citizens who can't fight back. The gavel came down with the sound of absolute finality, echoing through the silent courtroom like thunder. You are hereby remanded to federal custody, pending formal charges of civil rights violations, assault on a federal officer, perjury, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Based on the severity and pattern of your conduct, I'm recommending to the federal prosecutor that you face the maximum possible sentence. Under federal guidelines, 25 years without the possibility of parole. Part 8. Justice Delivered 6. Months later, the ripple effects of that morning continued to transform the entire justice system throughout the district and beyond. Officer Marcus Rodriguez sat in federal prison, his badge gone forever, his pension completely forfeited, his entire legacy reduced to a cautionary tale told at police academies across the country about what happens when power corrupts absolutely and goes unchecked for too long. The comprehensive federal investigation that Judge Williams had secretly initiated months before her assault uncovered systematic corruption throughout the entire police department. 12 officers were permanently terminated. 4 supervisors faced serious criminal charges. The entire department was placed under federal oversight with a monitor, required to implement sweeping reforms including mandatory bias training, revised use of force protocols, and comprehensive body camera systems with multiple backup redundancies. Most importantly, the 432 cases that Rodriguez had tainted over his 15-year career were systematically reopened and reviewed. Innocent people walked free from prison. Families torn apart were finally reunited. Communities that had lived in justified fear of Rodriguez and officers like him finally began to trust that justice was actually possible, that the system could work when people of courage stood up. Judge Kesha Williams became a powerful national symbol of judicial courage and integrity. She spoke at law schools across the country, trained police departments on constitutional policing, testified before Congress about criminal justice reform, and wrote extensively about the need for accountability in law enforcement. But she always returned to her courthouse, to her courtroom, where she continued to serve justice with the same quiet, dedication, and compassion she'd shown for over 2 decades. The courthouse itself was officially renamed the Justice Kesha Williams Federal Courthouse in a ceremony attended by hundreds. A bronze plaque was installed near the main entrance, bearing a simple but powerful inscription. Here, justice finally found its voice when courage met truth. Janet Morrison, her faithful clerk of 8 years, worked with the security department to have the surveillance video professionally edited into a comprehensive training film. It was now shown to every new officer, prosecutor, defense attorney, and judge in the district. The moment when Rodriguez's face transformed from smug arrogance to absolute horror as judge. Williams took the bench became known throughout law enforcement circles as the Reckoning. Officers Thompson and Davis, who had laughed while recording the assault and actively participated in the cover-up attempt, were also terminated and faced federal conspiracy charges. Their cases became textbook examples taught in law schools of how passive participation in injustice makes one equally morally and legally culpable. The young lawyers and law students who witnessed this June proceedings that historic day went on to become passionate civil rights attorneys, dedicated public defenders, and tireless advocates for justice reform. They would often say in interviews and speeches that watching Judge Williams that day taught them what true courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite fear, despite personal cost, despite a system designed to protect the powerful. Rodriguez's former victims began coming forward one by one, emboldened by finally seeing him held accountable. The county paid out millions in monetary settlements, but more importantly, each victim received something that money could never buy: official validation that what happened to them was wrong, that it mattered, that their pain was real and recognized. Today, a new generation of officers patrols those courthouse steps where everything changed. They're trained differently, supervised more closely, and held accountable immediately when they step out of line. They know the story of Officer Rodriguez and Judge Williams. They understand that the badge they wear is a sacred privilege and a responsibility. not a license for abuse or discrimination. And somewhere in federal prison, Marcus Rodriguez sits in his small cell, finally understanding what it truly means to be powerless, to be judged unfairly, to face consequences for your actions. The man who once arrogantly declared the courthouse his now knows the profound truth. Justice belongs to everyone equally, and absolutely no one, regardless of their position or authority, is above the law. On the anniversary of that morning, Judge Williams always takes a moment alone in her chambers. She touches the bruise that long ago faded from her face, but never quite left her memory. She thinks about all the people who suffered before her, who had no voice, no power, no way to fight back against injustice. And she renews her quiet vow to ensure that her courtroom, her courthouse, remains a place where truth matters more than power, where dignity is protected, and where justice is truly blind to everything except the facts and the law. The end. Remember, justice may be blind, but she sees everything. And sometimes, when courage meets opportunity, justice wears judicial robes and carries a gavel engraved with the single word that matters most: truth. Retry.